Behind the Shades.
My name is Erin Harris, and I am a certified lactation educator. So I help really any nursing mom throughout the journey, but my core focus is helping extended nursing moms. So those are moms who are breastfeeding beyond a year, well into toddlerhood, and weaning a nursing toddler, which is a very different experience than dealing with a kid in the first year of life. And I do this through my website, which is nursingmamas.com. I have an Instagram at erin.nursingmamas. And I have a free workshop that I help extended nursers with, which is you can go to nursingmamas.com/extended breastfeeding workshop. And that's primarily how I'm helping people right now.
Perfect, perfect. So free workshop, free. Everyone likes something for
Yep,
free, right? And it's
absolutely.
at nursingmamas.com.
Yes. Yeah, they can go to nursingmamas.com and find a link to it.
Perfect. So everyone listening, everyone watching, nursingmamas.com. You can get the young, kind lady. She can help you out figuring out what it is to be a new mother. And I think one of the scariest things besides public speaking, like we shared, is a new parent. I don't have any children. Sometimes when I see a 2-year-old and 1-year-old fall down, I'm like, oh, right? When I see mothers or fathers playing with their children, it's a beautiful sight. But one thing I think many of us don't see, maybe because there's a little bit of stigma to it, is actual nursing of
Mm-hmm.
the child, right? So, how are you helping new mothers, because they're the ones who are very active earlier on? How are you
Yeah,
helping them understand that, hey, it's going to be okay, but here's some tips?
I love that. So, yeah, there's so many misconceptions about breastfeeding that, and it's not even just the like people who go into it without taking courses. I took two separate courses preparing to breastfeed and felt so prepared and was blindsided by how hard it was. And what I realized, and I'm an educator, even before I did lactation work, I was an instructor, and I realized that hospital, especially hospital education, prenatal about lactation is primarily trying to persuade moms to breastfeed. So that information is very different in terms of persuasive tactics and information than really telling you what it's going to be like. If they're trying to persuade someone who's unsure about breastfeeding to nurse, they're not going to talk about cracked nipples. They're not going to talk about how uncomfortable it is and how, no, you have to nurse every 2 hours for months sometimes, and the lack of sleep. And so that's why so many parents are blindsided because they're not shown the reality. Some of that comes from, like you said, cultural stigma. Some of it comes from cultural norms and generational differences that, there's our parents were not pressured to breastfeed as much as we are. And so there's pressures from maybe our parents to say, just give a bottle. There's pressures of doing it all, right? There's this misconception that we can exclusively breastfeed and go back to work for 40 hours a week. And that's really, really hard to do. And so it sets moms up to feel like they're failing in every which way. And breastfeeding, you birth your baby, and if you plan to breastfeed, it is the very first experience of being a parent. And so if it doesn't go well, it is traumatizing for many moms because you feel like you're failing. And this one thing that's supposed to be so easy and natural is hard. And if you are stuck in that place and you don't have care, then you don't know what to do. And so many moms end up transitioning to formula, which is I'm not here to bash on formula. I use formula. Formula has a place. And that's including if moms don't want to nurse at all, because I'm in the position of it is your body, your right to choose what to do. And that's part of the missing link as well of the discussion, because we're so far into baby health, which is obviously important, but we're neglecting the mother's health, mental and physical health in the conversation. And so that's what I'm trying to bring to the table. Besides, like I said, I focus on extended nursing now, but I also provide care for prenatal and immediate postpartum care. And what I did was created a 10-week course, which sounds very, very intense, but it is laid out with everything you may need to know about the first weeks of breastfeeding. And so that guide and that online course, self-guided, helps moms who know they want to breastfeed and want to succeed, and they want to know what they don't know. Because that's what I heard over and over again when I talk to moms is, I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know what I needed to know. And so I set out to try to answer some of those questions. And
So for
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, so for someone like me who is trying to understand this, because a man's perspective is a little bit different, right? The baby is not suckling on my nipple, and I'm not a part of that interaction. So when I'm listening to what you're saying, it makes complete sense to me. But how does someone like me, who's not directly involved in the feeding, how can I support, let's say, my wife or my girlfriend from that perspective?
I love that question. And it's something actually that I do cover, because there's, I think, unintentionally, partners might affect the nursing relationship by actually wanting to be involved in a good way, right? Like parents and dads have been so much more involved in the last decade than they ever have been before. They want to participate. There's an equality, right? Like we go into parenting, and I say we because this was our perception as well, of 50-50, right? Like we're in this. But quickly we realized that when it came to feeding our child, it really couldn't be. So what the dad's role needs to be is not taking care of the baby, it's taking care of mom. It's feeding mom, it's making the meals, it's making sure she showers, because she may not do that on her own. She may not think about it because she's so focused. It's really doing everything else. It can be mom nurses, but then you take baby, you change the diaper, change the clothes, swaddle the baby, shush the baby, put the baby to sleep. Maybe dad becomes the pro at sleeping, right? My husband, he was the pro swaddler. And so I just let him do that thing. And so he could feel confident in something that I can be a part of it. So what I see often that kind of goes awry is the need or desire to bring in a bottle so dad can participate in feedings, usually at night, because there's this thought, well, if dad feeds the bottle at night, mom can sleep. But the problem is, especially in the beginning stages, mom has to nurse. And if she doesn't nurse, she has to pump. And there are two reasons for that, is because either she needs to keep up her supply. So it's getting into the technical side of it a little bit. There's supply and demand. So the more you breastfeed, the more your body gets the signal that it needs more milk. So if you stop nursing, your body is going to produce less milk. So if you start giving a formula bottle in the night, that's fine if you choose to do that. But if you are expecting to continue making the same amount of milk, then you're going to be, surprised when all of a sudden your pump output is less, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. And that's a beautiful way to clarify it, because we all have a role to play. And I think you raise a good point that we can kind of confuse the requirements, right? Because this child is new. This child doesn't know how to protect itself, provide for itself. And both people involved, they're probably new to this, especially if it's their first child.
Totally. I was just about to say the baby is new at it, but so are the parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And
you want to make sure that there are, I don't want to say boundaries, but they're well established duties, right?
yeah, yes. And that can, again, it's hard to fully know going into it because every situation is different, but especially depending on the birth. A vaginal birth is going to be unmedicated is going to maybe look different, and the partner's role would look different than a partner who had an epidural or a C-section. The C-section is going to need the most care and support, right? And they're not going to be able to be as mobile as someone who maybe didn't have that. And so that's why I say it depends on the whole situation. But yeah, going into it with the mindset of mom's job is only nursing. Like that's how I want you to instead of everything's 50-50, the dad has to participate in the feedings. No, dad can do everything else. And mom's job is this. If that's what she wants, and her goal is to nurse exclusively, and that let her do that thing, help her get good at it. And how do you help her get good at it? Usually providing the care. If she's struggling, like for my husband, for example, I was struggling in the beginning, and I can get into my story here in a couple minutes, but he's reminded me that there was a lactation clinic at our hospital. Totally out of my mind. Didn't even think about it. I'm like, oh, and got me the number so I could call and talk to them. So those are ways dads can support the mom in nursing. It's not with a bottle unless that's part of the holistic goal, meaning there's not always a lot of talk of supplementing while breastfeeding. It can happen. It's just usually you need to have it not happen in the very beginning, in the first weeks, because the milk supply has to establish, and then there can be adjustment.
So is it something, actually, let me take a step back.
Mm-hmm.
Simply, and I don't want to simplify the process because it's a lot, it's life changing. Communication has to be there 100%.
Yes, absolutely. Before I was in lactation, I have 2 master's degrees in communication, interpersonal communication, family communication. So I should have been good at this stuff. And when you're in it though, it's a different story because you're exhausted and you aren't thinking clearly, and your whole being has changed. You are truly a different person, and it's hard to get back on the rails. That there's a reason why they call it the 4th trimester. Those first 3 months of postpartum care is not just for the baby, it's for the mom too, in healing. And actually, I want to go back really quickly to the bottle discussion because I don't want it to make a blanket statement about that, because again, there are so many ways that moms can feel like they're failing. And there are, of course, times when bottles are necessary, but a lot of times pediatricians or doctors will push a bottle when it's maybe unnecessary, or when really what the mom needs is lactation care, simply latching problems, right? Like they're so focused on building the baby's weight that they're not really looking at what the problem is and solving the lactation issue. And introducing the bottle unnecessarily can lead to a mom not meeting her goals. So my goal is always, why are they requesting this? And if they are saying they need a bottle in the first couple weeks, they should also be requesting lactation care at the same time.
I'm wondering how much is being missed when we feed a child through breastfeeding or a bottle. I know when I was looking into it, I always saw many, I don't know if the research is still the same, but I know there's articles being written that the bond is different when you're breastfeeding versus bottle feeding.
So it is. So I use this from experience too. My first nursed until she was 4.5, couldn't get her off. My second, he latched fine. At 4 months, he was done. and blindsided me because I was like, we're good. We're just going along here. And he wanted nothing to do with me. He preferred the bottle. And I can say that that transition was really hard because I felt rejection and rejected. But once we got going and we were good with the bottle, like he still prefers me. I'm still a mama's boy. He's a mama's boy. He literally tells my husband, like, I love mama more, which is sad, but funny at the same time. So I had that fear, and that was unfounded. I think what happens is let me start with what used to happen. I'll tell you a story that my husband's grandma, she's in her 90s, shared with us. She had 5 boys in the 50s. And she described, first of all, that they made their own formula from like cow milk and syrup. And then they would take the bottle. She would just be like, oh yeah, I would just prop the newborn up on its side, put a towel under the bottle, put the bottle in the baby's mouth and walk away. Like, of course, that is going to affect a bond, right? Because they wouldn't, answer cries. Like, you're going to be more attuned to your baby when you're with your baby. So I don't think it's uniquely the bottle experience itself. It's that if you have the ability to walk away from your child and maybe everyone else is feeding your baby and you're not feeding your baby, that dynamic is going to be different. It doesn't mean that you're going to love your child any less, but it means that you may not be quite as in tune to the very, very subtle changes that you might see in that nursing dynamic. Because also what you don't see or understand, like when a mom, have you heard the term engorged before? Engorgement? Okay. So when a mom is engorged, it feels like you have to go to the bathroom from your breast. Like it physically hurts. And so that's what you also mean by in tune is you need your child to nurse so that you feel more comfortable. And so it's a very codependent relationship. So let's take, like maybe it's not, someone isn't fully formula feeding, but they're exclusively pumping. So that dynamic is still somewhat there, but a little distanced because, they are on a pump schedule that doesn't necessarily match when their child eats. And so each step out is going to be a little more disconnected, but it doesn't mean that you have no bond with your child, if that makes sense or helps.
Because it does. It clarifies it for me because I'm learning as I go along. Because there's going to be a time where I may be in that situation and I want to make sure that I am there for my wife and ultimately there for my child. And it helps to debunk and to some of the misconceptions and to break down some of the barriers that maybe many men like myself experience because we don't know the firsthand details until we're either in that situation or we're trying to say, okay, my wife needs me. What am I going to do? We're trying to run around. And one thing that I always wanted to understand, and I'm glad you touched on it, is when that latching and the breastfeeding stops, is there anything that needs to be done to maybe us to continue to assist the mother? Because if it's earlier, as you mentioned, than she expected, she may feel rejection. She may feel some emotional response to the child, especially if there's 2 where one was 4.5 years and the other one's 4 months.
Yes. So there is emotional need there. Weaning at any stage or age, I think I talk a lot about is the grief of it, because I think that a lot of moms, even if they want, like they're done nursing, they're so tired of it, there's a grief process of losing that relationship and knowing that relationship is over, because it is a special relationship. And I will say bond that no one else has with your child. I think that's what it is, that especially once you get past that newborn stage and you get into more, and they get eating food. And so the dynamic becomes a little different, and it's less about, I need to keep this baby alive through nutrition, which is a huge responsibility and pressure we put on ourselves to do. But it becomes emotional. It's that they fall, right? They're learning to walk and they fall and they cry and you can comfort them. It's they can't go to sleep, so you comfort them. It becomes a superpower. And it can be jarring to lose that power. And so being there emotionally, I remember when I was fully done nursing and I walked out of the room and just started bawling. And my husband tried to comfort me, but I could also tell he just didn't get it. He's like, but you're done. Like, finally. And so it's very bittersweet. And so I think just being aware and watching your partner, the mother, how she's doing. Does she seem especially sad? And this is kind of throughout the whole thing. What I say also is that connection can, if you are nursing resentfully with an older child because you don't know how to stop, or even in the first year, if you are doing it in a depressed state, that is going to hurt and harm your bond with your child more than just continuing nursing or introducing a bottle, right? So to me, the mental health of the mother and that affecting the bond is more important than the bottle itself. A lot of the research and the historical data that comes up about the need for exclusive nursing and the problem with formula actually dates back to the 70s when there was research done on Nestle. And Nestle was marketing their formula to third world countries that did not have the ability to clean they didn't have sanitized water, and they didn't have the ability to clean the bottles. And babies were dying because of it. So it's when there's such a push now here about the benefits of nursing. There are benefits, of course, to breast milk. But when we're talking about it here, it's still going to be a different subject because we do have the ability to sanitize our bottles, to make sure we have the money to access, although obviously income is an issue. And there's a whole discrepancy here. If you're a white wealthy woman, you're much more likely to exclusively nurse than you were if you were a lower income person on WIC. And they push formula there too. And so there are so many issues, right? And so many different conflicting things coming into play here that you have to be aware of coming in, that you are battling. And it's so hard to navigate that.
You made a good point when you mentioned the discrepancy between the classes and maybe even to a smaller degree culture. I wasn't breastfed as a child, but growing up, I grew up in a poorer situation than I am now. If I were to have children, I would prefer the mother of my children to breastfeed. But I can understand that if you're lower class, lower middle class, or if you're near that poverty line, you have to make a decision because the job is much more valuable to you versus someone, as you mentioned, who's wealthy and they can afford to take the time off, or they can afford more access to resources that maybe some of these other women don't have. So that's why I think, even though, as you mentioned, there's more research that needs to be done, that's probably why it's more accepting in certain groups of people, because they don't necessarily see the immediate effects, if any, versus another group that it's, well, my grandparents did it this way, my parents did it this way, and I'm doing it this way, and everyone turns out fine.
Right. Well, the turning out fine thing, right? It's a double-edged sword, because then you have the parents or the grandparents, right? The new grandparents that are coming in being like, I fed you from the bottle, you turned out fine. And so coming in and affecting, your goals, like maybe you want to try to do it differently, but everyone else, who is that older generation didn't do it that way. And it can be really hard and a lot of pressure because they then feel judged because you want to do it different. And it's a really complicated thing. And so having some of those discussions ahead of time with those relatives and partners, right? Like you said, it would be your choice. Like you would prefer if they breastfed, but you have to think about like, well, what if they don't want to breastfeed? That can be a challenging conversation. And additional pressure on someone who has to spend a lot of time and effort in their body feeding a child. There's so many dynamics in here, but the money is a huge part of it. We need to pay women to breastfeed. I'm not even talking about paid leave, which we don't even have. Most places in the world have paid leave and we don't. And it is about, we're told how much healthier our child is with breast milk. We're told how much better it is for society. We're told that it's better for our hospitals because our medical care will be lower because people are breastfed, and so they're not going to have some of these ailments. Yet we want mothers to do it for free and are even punished, because we lose jobs or, we have to choose to quit our jobs to do it. And that's actually what happened to me is, let's bring COVID into the conversation a little bit, because there's been a lot that's interesting in good ways for some people, but I think it's divided this bridge a little bit economically as well, or a lot. For me, when COVID hit, I had a 3-year-old, a 3.5-year-old, and a 9-month-old. And I had only been back to work about 8 weeks. And COVID hit, everything shut down. My husband and I were trying to work from home together with 2 kids. And I was nursing my daughter 3 times a day and pumping for my son 4 times a day, and then supplementing with formula as well. And the problem is my husband couldn't do the pumping, right? He could feed the bottles, but he couldn't nurse my daughter. And so when it came to us looking at each other after about 8 weeks going, we can't do this anymore, I had to be the one to quit. Like it was not even a question, because the bulk of the labor was still on me that he couldn't do. And so what happened in COVID is thousands and thousands of women quit their job because, like me, well, first of all, I also made less, right? And so like other women, you're making less, you're nursing, it's going to be us that leave. But then what also happened were pregnant women in 2020, 2021, they got the benefit, if they worked office, white collar jobs, of working from home. My sister-in-law, for example, she's never been away from her son. She had maternity leave, and then she and her husband have both worked from home their son's entire life, and he's almost 2. So they've never experienced having to put him in daycare and being separated from him. She could just nurse him and then hand him off again. And that separation that those of us pre-COVID had the experience of, a lot of women have found themselves not bothered by that. They've been able to continue and meet and reach and go beyond their goals because of that. But now let's look at the other side of COVID, right? Lower income families where they didn't have, and they still don't have the ability to work from home. They have to go into restaurants, into grocery stores. They have a job where they have to be there physically. So now not only were they putting themselves at risk of COVID, but they're still having to have that separation. And so we're going to continue, as we see data, we're going to see bigger discrepancies there. And, it's a big, big problem that we still haven't figured out how to fix, right? We can keep throwing money at the problem, but the reality is it comes back to giving money to the families so they can do this work, because it's a job, a 24-hour job.
That's something that many people either missed or maybe they didn't want to see it, because I work in a white collar job, and many people in that job who had children, it was like they didn't miss a beat, because if you had children in this type of job in the last, let's say 2 years, 3 years, you were always with your child every single day, because for the most part, you're working from home. Yep. As you mentioned, right? You gave birth to your child at home. the mother went on maternity leave, the father went on paternity leave, and everyone's at home. So the child didn't even see the inside of a daycare. Whereas I know some people, as soon they even in here in Canada, you get 18 months maternity leave,
Yeah.
right? That's the max. Everything else is like unpaid, but you get pretty much 18 months. So some people did the 12, maybe some did 18, some did the 12, and their child was in daycare during this. So their child would go there. And
Yeah.
anyone who has children, daycare, you pick up every single virus
Everything.
in the world. So they're going and coming sick, temperature, high temperature, fever. And where I am, let me tell you, Erin, if a child has a fever that is elevating, not that it's at the threshold where they actually send you
Oh
home,
yeah.
they're sending you home. And now the
Yep.
mother, the father has to say, okay, Mrs. Harris, you take Monday off. Mr. Harris takes Tuesday off, and someone has to compromise. It's tough.
Exactly. Well, and that's why I I didn't expect to take off more than I did. So my job, I was a college instructor, and so I went kind of semester by semester. And I was supposed to work that summer, and I said I need to take. I can't do summer. And then I realized that we were continuing on virtually, and my children's daycare was on campus, and I knew it was going to continue to be closed. And I was like, we can't keep doing this. It was so much, and so I became a stay-at-home mom. And yeah, their first time sending them back to daycare was terrifying, because you don't know what you're getting. And when they first went back, there was such rigid rules that if they had even a runny nose, they couldn't come back for like 72 hours. And so even then, when I was thinking of going back to work because they're back in daycare, it wasn't realistic, because yeah, he was going for the first time, my son, and picking up everything. And then yeah, being terrified they're going to get COVID, right, and bring it home. And so it's exhausting. It's so exhausting. And that was another thing too. Actually, I hear stories and see a lot of women who continue to nurse longer than maybe they would have, to keep those antibodies, especially before the vaccine came, or the child's vaccine, right? That came out not too long ago, a few months ago, under 2, and or actually under 5. But moms who had maybe gotten the vaccine and then knew that their baby was getting the benefits of the vaccine through the breast milk, so they continued on even further than beyond a year. And so it sounds like, okay, they get to a year, they get beyond a year. It's awesome. Like the World Health Organization now, and even the CDC, say 2 years and beyond. And really what that means, they're not telling moms they need to nurse 2 years and beyond, but it does add this added pressure to do so. It's more for pediatricians and doctors to not discourage, because what we were seeing was a mom would get to a year and say, yeah, I'm still nursing. And the doctor would be like, well, you don't have to do that, right? Or are you going to wean soon? Or like put these ideas in the mom's mind and pressure to quit when maybe there was no reason to. If the mom is perfectly happy doing it, kid still wants to do it, there's no reason not to continue. And so now what I do is I see these moms on this back end with these toddlers, very strong-willed, very opinionated. And what I call it is, in the beginning stages, newborn stage, you do on-demand nursing. So when the baby needs to eat, you feed them, and as opposed to like on a schedule. And they transition from that into demanding toddler nursing. So they want it when and where they want it. And now, as these moms and families are out of COVID and transitioning back into the world, there's a lot of difficulty in managing those behaviors. So I'll share a story of a client who came to me like, I need to wean. And I can usually tell when a mom is burnt out and it's not probably actually ready to wean, but they've hit a wall because they need boundaries with the nursing. But she said that her child always pulled her other breast out when they were home, and it was COVID, so she didn't really care. but she continued that behavior going into the world. And one day did it right when like a parent was walking by, and she was so embarrassed and mortified, and it made her want to quit. And so what I help these moms do is set loving boundaries so they can continue nursing, which is really what they want to do, but in a way that's manageable and okay for them. Because it's not okay for a child to do that. It's not okay for them to scream and tantrum and get what they want, right? But we're so used to using breastfeeding to comfort, and no one is out there telling you what to do. They say, that's fine, nurse till 2, nurse beyond 2, but they're not telling you how to do it. And they're not telling you how to stop doing it when it gets hard. And so I'm filling that void, because it can be a really big struggle emotionally for both the parent, and actually both parents too, because going back to how dads help, a big issue is night sleeping and going to bed and waking up through the night. And dads feel helpless because they try to put their kid to sleep. They want to help, but there are kids that are like, I will never sleep again unless mom gets back in here and nurses me. And you feel like they are running the house. And so I come in and try to help make that a little bit more peaceful, and make nursing manageable and happy again. Because sometimes it's just, you're doing it because you don't know how to not.
So Erin, so when you see some of the clients that you deal with who have some of these issues, some of these concerns, maybe, what are some of the more common roadblocks for the women and even the fathers to understand, okay, we need to figure something else. We need to figure something out. How are we going to move to the next stage, either weaning the child off or maybe continue what we're doing, but adjust it a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing to do is to really take a step back and assess what your goal is, because the bar often keeps moving. Most moms prenatally that I talk to, I'm like, what is your nursing goal? They'll say 6 months, because that's exclusive nursing for 6 months, because that's what the doctor says to do. Once a woman gets to 6 months, then they're like, okay, I did 6 months. I'm going to try to get to a year. Once they get to a year, they're like, okay, I'm going to try to get to 2 years, and it keeps moving. And usually after that, what I hear moms say is, I want to go until my child is ready to be done. But they're often surprised how long that can take. And so if they're at a point where they're burnt out, it's reassessing that. If you really want to go until your child is done, what can we do to make that more manageable? And if you're reassessed and you're like, no, I'm really ready to be done, okay, then what do we need to do to wean gently? Because just cutting it off, because that's what usually happens, is someone gets totally burnt out, and they say, no, we're done. And they try to cold turkey wean a child, and it doesn't go well. And so what you need to do, and this is for both moms and dads, is really, for these kiddos who nurse past 2, their mom is, and the milk is sort of like their blanket. It's their favorite thing. My daughter once told me when she was 2, just milk is love. And that always stuck out to me, of like, okay, milk is love. So if I take the milk away, it's like I'm taking my love away, right? And that's really, really hard. So you have to start to separate mom from milk, because especially these COVID kids, if mom goes away, the milk goes away, right? So if you tell your kid, one day the milk isn't going to be here anymore, well, that's actually going to backfire on you, because they're going to get scared and anxious and want to nurse more, because they also think that means mom's going away. So what you do is you start to incorporate what I call like special time with your child, either right before or right after a nursing session, so they can see that you don't leave as soon as the milk goes away. And because that's usually the only time, probably, that the kid gets mom to themselves, especially if there are other kids around, and where mom is sitting and being fully attentive to them. And so you want to show them that there are other ways to get your attention besides nursing. And kids are really smart. They understand way more than we give them credit for, even if they're not super verbal yet. So, but they can answer yes or no questions. And so if they're asking for milk, usually it's for 3 reasons. You can ask, like, are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Maybe more than that. Are you thirsty? Are you tired? Or do you just want mama time? And you can assess that and try to start breaking apart the need they're looking for. Because if they're really actually hungry, you can get them some food instead of nursing, but still play with them, or water. And that's how you start to break it apart. If you are their sole consoling person for everything, that's tough. And so you have to teach them that there are other means to comfort besides just you and the milk.
And I can understand the hesitation or maybe even some difficulty in that process, because one of the safest places in the world is in the arms of someone that is caring for you.
Yeah. Hopefully, right? That's the hope and the goal. And yeah, so if you can imagine and have some empathy for the kid, that if they think this means you're leaving them or you're going away or they're not going to be able to spend as much time with you because the milk is going away, that's going to lead to upset. And even if they don't know how to fully explain that's what they're feeling, if you can think of it in that way, you can have more compassion and patience for the upset. And I had to learn really quick with my son how to parent without nursing. I didn't actually go as much into my story, so I'll give a little bit more of it. So my daughter was nursing through 2, and it was so good. Like, we had a really rough beginning, but once we got past a year and I stopped nursing or pumping and it was just us, it was like a couple times a day, 2 or 3 times a day, and it was our connecting time and it was special. And then when I got pregnant again, my milk, it was very common for the milk to dry up during pregnancy. That happened, but I had full intention of latching her again when the baby came and tandem nursing. So that's what I did. And so I went from tandem nursing to this 4-month-old refusing to nurse. And I had to figure out how to console him without nursing, because the main reason I did that is because I didn't know how to deal with my daughter without nursing, because it was the easiest way to comfort her. And I knew she would be jealous of him for getting the milk, and I didn't want to deal with it. And so even though I still had this way of comforting her, I had to figure out quick what to do. And now I can apply those things to my daughter when I weaned her, that, really it comes down to hugs. That's how you comfort. It's still you. I don't offer him to nurse now, and he's still younger than my daughter was. Like, what am I trying to say? My daughter was still nursing at the age he was. So, if he hurts himself, I get down on the floor and I open my arms and I give him a hug. And so it's still me. It's still comfort. I'm still there. It's just not with my boob. But that's a rough transition to get out of. And so for dads, what you can do is a lot of it's just patience. And sometimes it's making mom okay with leaving, because there's a lot of guilt when they're upset, and walking away from them is really, really hard. So I typically suggest, if you're dealing with nighttime, like bedtime, is pick a day. Just start with 1 day a week. That's data day. Maybe it starts during the day. Maybe it's a nap time. That's usually easier than bedtime. But a lot of the time it has to be mom leaving for the kid to give in and be okay with it at first. So look at it as maybe mom goes to get some coffee or see her friend, or that's self-care time. But you have to tell the kid, oh, mom's not here right now. So, and you have to not be like, okay, so it's dad, I have to do it. But it's like, pump it up, right? Like, oh, this is our special time. Because what moms do unintentionally is get in the way of dads by telling them they're doing it wrong. Like, no, you're just doing it wrong. You have to put this blanket on the bed. You have to snuggle them in this position. You have to, no, you got the wrong passy, And so of course dads are like, all right, you do it. You do it if I'm doing it wrong. And so moms have to be quiet and leave. And dads have to be okay with handling the upset that mom can easily fix with the boob. You don't have that magic cure. So you have to be okay with just the hugs and sitting through it until they understand that you're not going to leave. You're there for them and they'll get used to you too.